I laugh or kid about deadlines. None of this is funny because lives are impacted, regions are impacted, but where do we stand in this conflict from your perspective?
The expiration of the MOU sounds dramatic. I don't think we're going to see a resumption of a shooting war. That's not what the expiration of this document means. This was effectively a framework document that had two major objectives. One, in the immediate future, immediately upon its signing, a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and then more aspirationally down the line, a discussion about frameworks for a long-term agreement to resolve this war. Obviously, one that would have had to deal with issues including Iran's nuclear program and the like. As you noted, the ceasefire, the efforts to open up Hormuz crumbled really within days and devolved within, I think, 3 weeks into a significant flare-up of fighting between the US and Iran. I think what we'll have with the expiration tomorrow of this MOU is both sides potentially hinting that conditions on the ground, such as they were, persist in the absence of something new. Pakistan, the mediator, said some days ago, claimed that the parties had decided on a de facto extension of that MOU. That was denied most volubly by Iran. And it's worth remembering that in the interim, we've had these talks involving Oman about some kind of peaceable power sharing, if you like, or property share for the Hormuz in terms of directions of access and egress. Iran says those talks continue. In fact, it says the US isn't involved. The United States says it has been involved, and Oman has served as a mediator. So there is an overarching, or should we say a backdrop mechanism still ongoing. I think what Trump doesn't want, what he would like, obviously, is victory and Iranian capitulation. That doesn't look likely at all to happen. He certainly does not want a U.S. capitulation at this time, so close to the U.S. midterms. Hence, as you noted, the U.S. administration looking at an economic alternative to a shooting war campaign or a primarily combat-driven campaign.
Not that we ever really stopped shooting, Dan. We talk about the MOU and the ceasefire, but it's been punctuated by skirmishes. And even in the last couple of days, more ships have come under attack in the Strait of Hormuz. The UK Maritime Trade Operations on Saturday said it heard about a projectile hitting the hull of a bulk carrier. 2 Abu Dhabi national oil vessels hit on Thursday. Another hit on Friday evening. What we're hearing, though, is that the president wants to take an economic approach, that we won't see a lot of more deliberate all-out fighting, and that this week, as the Treasury Secretary warned, we'd get the 1-2 punch, Dan. What does Iran and what does Israel expect that will include?
Israel, it's worth noting, there is some common wisdom out there suggesting Netanyahu would be happy to see a resumption of the war. That's not borne out by public statements or Israel's own concerns, both economic and its own election coming up just 2 months away. What Israeli officials have been saying increasingly over recent weeks is they believe that Iran is on the precipice of a major internal collapse economically. They would like to see a continuation of that US-led pressure on Iran. They're observing long-term trends. For example, some major Gulf players looking at creating their own alternative exit points for their energy exports, given Iran's de facto control over much of Hormuz. The Israelis seem fairly sanguine about the possibility of an Iranian economic collapse. That might not be them crying uncle, as Trump would put it. However, it may make them more open to a diplomatic agreement here, perhaps one involving them surrendering what remains of their nuclear program. I think everyone realizes now in this 6th month of this war that I imagine, and this is pretty much borne out by what we heard at the outset, that both Israel and the United States thought would last no more than 6 weeks. It's now in its 6th month. There is an understanding that regime change, which was a downstream hope by the allies that would result from their military campaigns, that will not happen absent an invasion of a U.S. force, presumably, boots on the ground, or also on the ground, an organic uprising by Iranian dissidents, opposition figures. Well, 8 months ago, the Iranian regime brutally put down what was then a sweeping set of protests. It doesn't appear that a protest movement or an anti-government movement is likely to arise with the sort of muscle required to change the regime. So I think everyone now is looking at changing regime calculations by making it intolerable to maintain normal living in Iran under what would appear to be an increasing set of US-led sanctions.